Hello everyone, welcome back to the last part of this tutorial concerning Room database. If you haven't seen the previous episodes, no worries, you still can follow with us this tutorial regardless of what we have done before, because in this tutorial we're going to talk about adding type converters to your database. So I'm going to explain this with a generic manner. It is more likely that our app needs to store custom data type in a single data column. For example, a JSON formatted strings that will convert it afterwards with lists of some data. For that matter, we use type converters. So we distinguish between two types of type converters: the normal type converters that doesn't need any extra library, and a controlled type converter. So for the first one, we have to tell Room how to deal with this data type. So first of all, we will create a class in the database package, and let's just call it converter. Let's call it converters. It will be just a normal class. Here we need, for example, in our case, let's say bioentity. We want to, instead of dealing with long as a data type, we want to change this long to, let's say, for example, date. Date as a data type is not supported by default with Room database. So let's come back to the converters, and the first method that we will create is a method that's going to allow us to convert from that timestamp to date. So the timestamp is represented with a long value. So let's call this function from timestamp. It's going to take in parameter a value of long, because the timestamp is long in our case, and it's gonna give us a date, nullable date. For the implementation of this function, it will return the value that we have provided. If it's not null, we will transform it simply to a date as follow. So this is the implementation of from timestamp. So basically it's going to convert from long to timestamp, from timestamp, which is a long value, to a date. So we have to annotate, of course, this function with type converter to tell Room database that, hey, we need to convert from long to a date in our case. So now the opposite, or the way around, is to in order to save, so this is basically from long to timestamp, we are reading a long value and we are going to read it to a date. Now, in order to save data, now we will call it here date to timestamp. So in order to save the data, so it's going to be, of course, of type date, nullable, and long as well, nullable, and it will return date and time and too long. And we have to annotate this function with type converter, not type converters, and we are done. So this is the first case to do it. I don't know why it's giving this remove redundant method, so we don't need actually, because time is a long, I think it's a long value. Yeah. Sometimes we need to pass additional dependencies to our converters. So we have to declare a new way of converters called controlled converters. So let's come back to the entity, for example, bookmark entity, and let's assume that here, instead of product title, we want to store here a list of string in this case. So a list of string, it's not supported with Room database. So we have to provide this converter. So it's going to allow Room database to convert from list to a string. Basically, in our case, we need to format this data with a JSON objects. So in order to do that, I'm going to create a new class here in database, and let's call it controlled converter. Controlled converter is a converter that needs additional dependency in order to convert your data. So first of all, annotate this controlled converter with provide type converter. Here we're going to put your needed dependency. In my case, I would like to use the JSON as a converter. So JSON is an external library. Room database doesn't recognize this third-party library, so the first way how to declare converter is not going to work. So that's why we are declaring a controlled converter, because we are going to work with a third-party library. So here I'm going to add the methods that is going to, for example, let's say convert from one type and read and write thus data type. So let's come back to this bookmark, and let's change it to string. And let's say here, for example, product IDs. It's gonna be list of long. So we want to save list of long, and we want to retrieve list of long. So this is the conversion. And let's add, for example, here, just for the sake of this tutorial, it's gonna be list of integers. So how many products you want in your wish list or in your bookmark. So we're going to convert in this controlled converter or to read and write list of long and list of integers. So here I'm going to create basically 4 functions, because we're going to read and write for the long, and we're going to read and write for the integer. So I'm going to annotate this function with type converter, and it's going to be a function. So the first one is going to be from JSON to long list. So basically we are reading a string. I'm going to transform it to a list of long values. So here in the parameter, it will be a JSON, which is basically a string, and the string is going to be stored in the database. So list of long, that's what's going to give us. And here it will return. Of course, this operation is going to raise an exception. And what is this exception? It will be JSON syntax. Perhaps we have provided the wrong syntax, so it will be JSON syntax exception. In this case, we will return an empty list. So otherwise, so the syntax from the JSON, it will be how to convert this string to long. It will be JSON dot from JSON, and we need to provide here the JSON source, and here the object, it's going to be a type token. So here, this is the type that we want to convert to. It will be a list of long, and it will be type. This is how to convert in JSON syntax or JSON way to convert from string to this line here, or this line is it's going to differ from library to another. All right. So the other way around, which is basically type converter, it's going to be a function. So now we will long list to JSON or JSON string. You can call it whatever you want. So here it's going to be longs, lazy or a lame name of a parameter, and it's going to be list of long. All right, and it will give us, of course, a string. So it will return as well try, because it's gonna perhaps raise an exception. So exception is gonna be, of course, of JSON syntax exception. In case of exception, it will return for us an empty JSON formatted string. Otherwise, it's gonna be JSON dot to JSON, of course. So for the source, it's gonna be the longs, and for the object, it will be type token, and it will be list that we want to convert from of long, and it will be, and that type, sorry, not it will be, but that type. I'm tripping. I think we have forgot something. Yeah. So this is how to convert from and to JSON. So it will be the same thing for the string conversion. So from JSON to integer, I want to say integer, not string, and from integer list, and here we're going to put, I think I have, no problem. I will put here integer, and here I'm going to put integer, and I think that's pretty much it. For the second one, instead of integer, I think I have to do it lowercase here, and for the source it will be integer, and that's pretty much it. So this is how to declare your control type converters. Finally, inside the module object, here you have to add, after calling add migration, I'm going to call add type converters, and here in our case it's controlled converter, and it will be a JSON just like this. So this is the we are adding it to the instantiation of the database. And let's go to the database file or database class. We have to put here to annotate, of course, this in case you want only the first type converter, which is the normal one without any external, without a third-party library. Only here in the database annotate this one with type converter or type converters, and add here your converter. So the converter will be converters, that's class. Let's import type converters, and you are good to go. And in case you want to add the controlled type converter, I'm going to comment this one with the same thing, type converters, and here I'm going to put controlled converter. So this is basically how to set up your converter. So I'm going to recap. So if you want to add a type converter that's going to handle for you data from or to that custom data that doesn't require a specific third-party library, simply create a new class, call it converter or whatever you want to call it, and specify the from or to that specific custom data type. And instead, in your entity, instead of doing, for example, where is the bio here? Instead of doing long, just do simply, just do, for example, date here instead of long, okay? But if you require, for example, a third-party library, you need to add the controlled converter, simply create a new class, annotate it with provide type converter, and here choose the converter of your choice. And in my case, I'm choosing JSON. So I have just created, for example, converting from or and to list of long and list of integers. And in your app module, add this controlled type converter before calling build. And in your database, for both of them, in the database class, if you are using one of them, just annotate one of them with type converters, either controlled converter that you have created or that converter. So this is basically how to create type converters in Room database. So I think that we have seen pretty much all the important things in Room database. So you are now able to persist your data locally, properly setting up your room database, properly creating an entities with different criterias, properly handling relationship between entities, and properly migrating from your schema to a new version, and properly adding type converters. I hope you liked this tutorial. See you in the next one, and bye-bye.